Never imagined I would come to think about this. That moment, that touch, everything seemed wrong. I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't desire someone who, in every sense, was the last person I could desire. My brother. Or better yet, my pretend brother. I think that's why this feeling was so frightening. 'Cause in a way, we were raised together as if we were really siblings. We spent our whole lives in a natural friendship, full of laughter, silly arguments, as if we shared the same blood. But now he was so close. Close enough for me to smell him. Close enough to notice the way he looked at me. A gaze full of something I couldn't ignore. I felt my breath quicken whenever he came near. The heat radiating from his body felt like a flame burning my skin, a constant reminder that something inside me was changing. Never before had our bodies been so close, so near, so charged with a tension I didn't know how to manage. My chest tightened with anxiety, and at the same time I didn't want him to move away. And for a moment I didn't know if I should pull back or give in. The desire grew inside me, but my mind told me this couldn't be right. My heart raced faster, each second felt more unbearable. He was there in front of me, so close, so real. I saw him approaching, his eyes gleaming in a way that made me shiver. The room's light was soft, almost intimate, and his presence seemed to consume the space. Before I could think about what was happening, he touched me. It was a light touch, a delicate finger brushing my arm, but it was enough to make me tremble. I wanted to push him away, I wanted to scream that this was wrong, but the sensation his touch provoked was too strong to resist. It was as if, in that instant, the world stopped and I was left there, frozen, in the middle of an impossible temptation. My body responded in a way I couldn't control. The heat rose from my stomach to the tips of my fingers, making the air around us thick and electrically charged. He looked me in the eyes, and for a second I saw desire reflected in his. It wasn't just his eyes, it was his body too. How he moved closer so calmly, as if he knew what was happening inside me, as if it was inevitable. He whispered my name, as if it was a confession I didn't know if I wanted to hear or if I already expected to hear. I knew this wasn't just a simple desire. It was something much deeper, much more unsettling. I couldn't be attracted to him. He was my brother. I couldn't. But at the same time, there was something in me that I couldn't ignore anymore. I could feel the rising heat between us, a pressure, a need that seemed to grow with every passing second. He moved closer and touched my face with the palms of his warm hands, as if it was a way to calm my mind or perhaps to ignite my body even more. And it was as if all logic in the world ceased to exist. His lips met mine, and for a moment I didn't know if I was dreaming or living a nightmare. His taste was on me, something sweet and urgent, and the intensity of the kiss enveloped me in such a way that I no longer knew where I began and where I ended. Kiss started soft but quickly intensified. I no longer knew what was right and what was wrong. All I could feel was the warmth of his skin, the firm touch of his hands, his body against mine. My entire body responded to his, as if it knew exactly what to do. I wanted to pull away, wanted to scream that this couldn't happen, but I couldn't. The desire grew stronger with each passing second, as if something inside me had finally been set free. I surrendered to the kiss, to the touches, to the whispers of a temptation I didn't know where it came from, but that I could no longer avoid. And that's when he did something that unsettled me even more. He pulled his lips away for a moment, and I saw him. He was smiling. Not a mischievous smile, but something softer, something that made me question everything I was feeling. "It's not what you're thinking," he said with an almost serene voice while running his hand along my waist, pulling me closer to him. We're not siblings. You were never my sister." I froze. What he said made all my certainties crumble in a matter of seconds. His words fell over me like instant relief, yet confusion still took hold of me. He moved back a little, his expression now more serious. "You're my friend, my companion, and that has never changed. We were never really siblings. I was only adopted into your family, but you've always been more than that to me. And I didn't know if you felt the same. But now, I see." I stayed silent, my heart beating too fast, trying to process what he had just revealed. I had never known this. I had never known he was a pretend brother. That the prohibition I felt, the guilt, was based on something that didn't even exist. I looked at him, feeling a mixture of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to step away, to run from that situation, but another part, the one that had always been repressed, wanted more. The relief was overwhelming. The fear and confusion began to dissipate, replaced by something more genuine, more real. The feeling of doing something wrong disappeared, and the desire became clear. Clear that what was happening between us was a choice. A choice I could make without the weight of guilt, without the weight of the forbidden. I knew that now there were no more barriers, nothing stopping me from moving forward. He pulled me closer, and this time I didn't hesitate. Kiss that followed was deeper, more certain. There was no more fear. There was no more confusion. I finally understood what he meant. He wasn't my brother. And in that moment, everything felt right. I could feel his body pressing against mine, each of his movements making me more anxious, more surrendered. His fingers explored my skin, going deeper with every touch, bolder. The heat grew with each passing second, and the barriers I thought existed were no longer there. He kissed me again, more fiercely, as if time had stopped for us, as if nothing else mattered beyond what we were sharing. The feeling of being with him, of being so close, made me lose control over my own mind. I felt him as a constant presence, as if nothing else existed outside of him and me. Every movement I made, every touch from him, made my body respond in ways I had never imagined I was capable of. I no longer knew who I was at that moment, whether I was the girl who used to be his sister, or if I was becoming something completely different. Something he had awakened in me, something that now seemed inevitable. My hands began to explore his body as well. I ran them down his back, feeling the tense muscles, his broad shoulders. He sighed when I touched his chest, the warm skin, his heartbeat faster than ever. He was as vulnerable as I was, and that thought made my desire grow even stronger. As if he was allowing me to uncover everything that had never been said between us. As if words were unnecessary and our bodies were speaking for us. I no longer knew where the line between right and wrong began. All sense of time had disappeared. All I knew was that he wanted me just as I wanted him, and that certainty made my resistance, no matter how strong, slowly fade away. I was scared. Scared of losing myself, scared of giving in completely. But I was also excited to feel this freedom, this explosion of emotions I had never imagined I would experience. Every touch from him was like a spark, a flame that burned, that consumed me from the inside out. He slid his hands to the small of my back, pulling me closer, and I could feel the pressure of his body against mine. His body was warm, firm, and that made me feel even more vulnerable. When he touched me again, this time at the curve of my neck, a shiver ran down the length of my body. I couldn't hold back any longer. I couldn't deny it anymore. Our bodies moved together, synchronized, as if we already knew what the other wanted, what the other needed. He kissed my neck, then trailed down to my shoulder, and I let out an involuntary sigh. The tension between us grew, but in a way that didn't feel wrong. On the contrary, it felt natural, as if we were finally doing something that should have happened all along. Something that should never have been repressed. Kisses continued, each one more intense than the last, each one more urgent. I could feel his fingers exploring the fabric of my dress, slowly moving up to my waist, as if he wanted to go deeper, to go beyond the barriers that still existed between us. I knew there was no turning back. I knew that by allowing him to touch me, to kiss me in this way, we were breaking through something profound, something we perhaps didn't even know existed. And then he looked at me again, this time with a gentler, more confident gaze. "Do you understand now?" he asked, with a tone of voice that still carried the urgency of the moment, but also the calmness of someone who knew that what was happening was inevitable. Something that had always been a part of us, even if we had never realized it. I nodded, speechless, but with every fiber of my being saying that I understood, that I felt it. He wasn't my brother. He never had been. And somehow, that gave me the freedom I needed to finally surrender to what was happening between us. When he kissed me again, this time more deeply, more intensely, I felt all the fear, all the confusion dissipate, replaced by a wave of pleasure, of desire, of certainty. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Our bodies were entwined, and there was no longer any doubt, any guilt. There was only desire, the need to continue to explore every sensation, every touch, without fear of what might come next. I don't know how much time passed, but it felt as if time had completely stopped. The only thing that mattered was him and me, and the way our bodies connected, understood each other, belonged to one another. I didn't know whether it was the kiss or the touch that made me lose control the most, but I knew I didn't want it to end. I wanted to keep exploring this new world, this new us. He turned me gently, pressing my body against his, and for the first time the feeling of being in his arms felt right. As if everything had been leading up to this moment. As if nothing else mattered, and the only place I wanted to be was there, with him. I didn't know what the future held for us. I didn't know what this change, this revelation meant, but I knew that, at that moment, he was no longer my fake brother. He was the man I wanted to be with. And that, as hard as it was to accept, no longer felt wrong. Not anymore. The atmosphere grew heavier as our bodies moved together. The air between us was charged with electricity, and every touch, every kiss, felt like an invitation to a precipice from which there was no turning back. Desire pulsed through my veins, and I no longer knew whether it was just a fleeting reaction or something deeper, something more genuine. The line between right and wrong had disappeared, replaced by a voracious need, something beyond any morality or convention. I was completely absorbed by his touch. His lips, which had once been gentle, were now more demanding, more urgent. His body pressed against mine with such intensity that I could feel every inch of him. Temperature between us was rising, and I could no longer think clearly. What once seemed impossible was now real, tangible. He was there, with me, and there was nothing else in the world that could take me away from that moment. "I didn't know you felt it too," he said, his voice hoarse and low, a murmur that almost made me lose my train of thought. He was there, kissing me with an intensity that left me breathless, and at the same time, his words had a profound impact on me. I didn't know how to react anymore, how to understand what it meant. Had he always felt this? Was he also trapped in the same doubt, the same fear that consumed me? I pulled back slightly just to look into his eyes. They were more intense than ever, and that only added to the whirlwind inside me. The words he had said opened a new door, a new possibility. I don't know what I feel anymore," I said, my voice trembling. "This is wrong, it shouldn't be happening." But as I looked at him, I realized that, to him, this wasn't wrong. He didn't seem to have any doubt. His eyes shone with something more, something I had never seen before, but now made perfect sense. He approached again, this time more slowly, touching my face with a tenderness that contrasted with the urgency of the moment. It was as if he wanted to reassure me, as if he knew I needed a moment to process everything that was happening. "It's not wrong," he whispered. "Nothing we're doing is wrong. Because deep down, I've always known we were more than just siblings." His words echoed in my mind, and I found myself confronted with the truth that, until then, I had tried to avoid. He was right. We had never really been siblings. Our connection had always been different, and now I saw it with a clarity that hadn't existed before. There was something more between us, something that hid behind all our everyday interactions, behind every smile and joke. I could feel it now, finally. Something that had always been there, but I had never known how to interpret. He kissed me again, this time more gently, more patiently. His lips explored mine with a sweetness that left me speechless, as if he were asking for permission to go further. I knew what he wanted. I knew what he expected from me. And, for the first time, I was ready to take that step. I didn't know what it meant, but at that moment, with him, it felt right. And no matter how much my mind screamed at me to stop, my body no longer wanted to pull away. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and soon I felt his hands sliding around my waist with a firm, possessive touch. The desire he awakened in me was uncontrollable. There was no longer room for doubts, for fears. There was only room for him, for what we were doing there together in that exchange of caresses and kisses. All I wanted at that moment was to be closer to him, to feel more, to explore more. Our bodies molded into each other, in a dance that seemed to have been rehearsed somewhere distant, where the forbidden didn't exist. He pulled me even closer, and I felt his warm breath on my neck. Each movement seemed to make the desire between us grow, expand, until it became the only thing that remained. The outside world disappeared. Nothing else mattered. Just the two of us in that tight space between touches and kisses. He looked at me once again, and this time his gaze was filled with a kind of urgency that made me tremble. He wanted me, I knew that. And more than ever, I wanted to respond to that desire. There were no more limitations, nothing else that could separate us. I didn't know what the future held, but at that moment I didn't care. All that mattered was being with him, being with the person who, deep down, had always been more than anything I could understand. He made me feel alive like never before. The words slipped from my lips without planning. I want more. Don't stop. And then he didn't stop. There were no more words to say, only the certainty that, in that moment, everything we desired was mutual. What had started as something confusing and forbidden was now transforming into something tangible, something neither of us wanted to deny anymore. Whatever this desire, this connection was, at that moment it felt like the only possible path. The heat between us intensified, and I could no longer resist. His eyes were locked on mine, and I knew at that moment that the confusion had given way to something clearer, more powerful. He touched me again, with a delicacy that seemed to contrast with the intensity of what we were experiencing. But even though it was gentle, it was impossible to deny the strength of the desire between us. He pulled me closer, our bodies once again uniting in a dance of touches and kisses that only grew more intense. The outside world completely disappeared. There were no more rules, no more fears. Only the now, what we were living, what we could finally share without the barriers that had once separated us. I didn't know what would happen next, but at that moment I knew it was right. He was no longer my pretend brother. He was the man I desired, the man I wanted to be with, without regrets, without fear. And as I finally surrendered to that desire, I realized that he felt the same. He wasn't just a brother. He was the person who completed me in a way I had never imagined. The desire that had started as something forbidden, something wrong, now seemed natural. The need to be with him was no longer a doubt or a fear. It was a certainty. And when he looked into my eyes with that soft smile, as if everything that had happened marked the end of a cycle, I knew we didn't need any more words. I gave myself to him without hesitation, without reservations, because now I knew there was nothing left to fear. What was happening between us was real, and it was what had always been meant to be. The sense of freedom that came with that understanding was overwhelming. I knew that by making this decision, nothing would ever be the same again. But at that moment, with him, I didn't care about what would come next. All that mattered was that we were together, in a way we had always been destined to be. Now that you know the truth, what would you do in her place? Leave your opinion in the comments and share your thoughts. Your interaction is very important. If you enjoyed this intense and captivating story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories full of tension, forbidden romance, and desire. Thank you for watching and see you next time.